Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, listeners, depending on where you are in Africa. My name is Levantisani, and I'll be your host today for the African Female Voices podcast, where we celebrate African women who are doing amazing things across the globe, and also just hone in on the challenges that are facing African women across the diaspora. In today's episode, we'll be focusing on a topic that I guess a lot of Africans are aware of, the impact of what we'll be discussing today, but don't really have a clue as to why we are facing such an issue in the year 2024. And I'm privileged to be joined by somebody from an organization that I've been following for a few years now, which I really believe that it will make it a world of a difference to what we're discussing today. So in today's episode, we'll be focusing on child marriage, which is a global issue. We do know that it's fueled by other socioeconomic issues that we face in Africa particularly. So issues around poverty, inequality, security, which has had devastating consequences around the world. I'll just delve into some statistics to truly show you how the impact of this issue across Africa. So as it stands today, the UNICEF has released some stats around the issue of child marriage. So 12 million girls marry before the age of 18 every year. 1 in 5 girls in the world are married before 18, and over 650 million women alive today were married as children. By the definition of children, we mean anyone under the age of 18 years. So this truly shows you that this is a noteworthy topic that I think we need to really unpack today and discuss how, as ordinary citizens, how we can be allies and support some of the causes that are dedicated towards eradicating child marriages. And I believe one of those organizations that's dedicated its entire mission to eradicating child marriages is Girls Not Brides, and we are joined today by Nerida. I'll just read a brief bio of who she is. She is indeed a powerhouse. Nerida leads both the African team and the development and implementation of the Girls Not Brides strategy in Africa, which includes managing collaboration with national partnerships, coalitions, member organizations, and African institutions. So Nerida is a human rights defender from Kenya with over 17 years of experience working on social justice, human rights, and legal sectors in the East of Africa region. She holds a Master of Law degree in public international law and was admitted to the Kenyan bar as an advocate of the High Court in 2006. Welcome, Nerida. It's a pleasure to have you today, and we look forward to digging deep into the issue of child marriages.
Thank you, Lebo, and what a fantastic intro, and it's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm really excited for the conversation today.
I am too. I think it's noteworthy to just maybe dig deep into what really is child marriage. So by definition, I mean, for an ordinary citizen, to me, it would mean somebody who is married before the age of 18, right? And the issue of consent comes in there to say that what is the law saying about consent? If the law is not clear on the issue of consent, surely we don't really have a legal background to say that this is a child marriage. So can you maybe unpack what child marriage is and the impact that it's had on African countries?
First of all, thank you so much. And you're quite right. I think when you started with the statistics, you were quite right in saying that, first of all, the definition of child marriage is any marriage, whether formal or informal, because it could be informal where people are living together and are recognized as, a couple in that community, where either of the parties, whether it's the girl, any of the parties of the marriage are under 18. So this is considered a violation of human rights, and this is globally accepted. All countries that are member states of the UN have signed on to what we call treaties or charters, and one of them is the United Nations Charter Treaty of the Child, and which recognizes any marriage under the age of 18 as child marriage, which is not allowed. So despite issues around what we would call maybe beliefs or traditions where a community or a nation might say, but our laws allow for this, internationally, what is accepted is any marriage under the age of 18, whether it's informal or formal, is considered child marriage. And just to note that 1 in 4 girls globally are married before the age of 18. That's almost 15 million girls each year. Or maybe to break it down even further, every 2 seconds, one girl under the age of 18 gets married. So as you can see, it really is a challenge. It really needs to be a priority issue for us. And despite common belief, every country in the world has a form of child marriage. So it's not only an African issue or a Southern Africa or an Eastern African issue. It's really every country in the world needs to be prioritizing this because it happens everywhere.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, the stats are jaw-dropping. And to think that it's 2024, you'd expect that a lot of countries have advanced and a lot of cultures have advanced in their understanding of certain things. So issues around consent, issues around age, issues around the law. And I know there are a lot of grassroots organizations that are working on the ground to demystify the issue of child marriage and consent, etc. So I wanted to maybe go into the context of Africa as to why child marriages exist. You spoke briefly about culture, to say that culture can be one of those aspects that exacerbates the issue of child marriages. So maybe give a quick overview to the audience who are wondering, I mean, it's 2024, why does the issue of child marriages exist? Why are cultures permitting such a phenomenon?
So the issue of culture definitely is one of what we call drivers of child marriage. So what causes child marriage in different communities? And every community is different. Every community is unique in the way they express themselves, in the way they express their culture. I want to begin by saying we celebrate our African culture. Culture is something to be celebrated. It's something that gives us purpose, gives us a sense of unity and belonging. However, we also recognize there are certain aspects of the way culture is expressed that is not always favorable. And one key aspect of this is child marriage, which in a lot of communities in Africa is a deep-rooted cultural practice. And if you even unpack it further and go beyond that, why is it that? Is because there's a form of gender inequality. We always say child marriage is an expression of gender inequality, where girls are considered less than boys, or girls are considered commodities to be either sold off to get dowry or money for the families to continue. And we work in very many communities in Africa. And one community I'll never forget, at the border of Kenya and Tanzania, we went, we were there and we were talking to the elders who are the keepers of the culture. And they told us, look, for me as a man, I value having more girls in my homestead or in my home. And we were very excited to hear that. We're like, oh, this is great and something that we don't often see. And then he continues and says, because I can fetch more cows and more money once I sell them off, once they've reached puberty. So you can see the expression of culture in that sense is looking at girls as commodities or less than boys. And so that's where child marriage comes in. And that's really the expression of child marriage is one of the issues of gender inequality. So while it's a deep-rooted cultural practice, it is also very clear that culture changes. It's not stagnant. How we express culture will change with every generation as time goes by. And so we're also starting to see really great progress where in communities, for example, where 30, 40 years ago, you could not even mention the idea of let's stop child marriage and you would probably get, kicked out of the community. Now communities themselves are saying, look, we see the value in having girls and young women complete school, excel in their careers. And then because we're seeing the impact of that, they're coming back and they're building and they're developing our community. So culture just changed. But another key fact in Africa, another key, what we call driver or cause of child marriage is also economic factors. You spoke about that. Poverty drives families to marry off their daughters early, to reduce financial burdens, and to gain economic benefits through dowries. So unless we're also tackling, or governments are really taking the key effort to tackle this economic inequality or poverty, we will see in some communities this practice still thriving. Because despite programming that we may do as organizations around gender inequality and asking for families to recognize the value of girls, if there's economic inequality, this practice is likely to still go on. And I'll just also add one more factor is really what we call lack of access to education. So while there's no silver bullet, like there's no one thing that if we turn it or we work on it that will end child marriage, it needs to have very many other things involved. We know education comes closest towards actually ending child marriage. Keeping girls in school is one of the best ways we have seen and evidence has shown to delay child marriage or to delay marriage. And the longer a girl stays in school, the less likely she is to be married before 18. So education is one of our I would call it our silver bullets. And one of the key things that as an organization at Girls Not Brides and our partners, we really insist on: let us work on education. Let us work on keeping girls in school until the age of 18. Let us make access to school possible for a majority of the girls, even those who are living in areas where they have economic burdens or where there's massive poverty. If we introduce school and make it affordable, we will see child marriage rates falling.
Thank you so much for that. I think you delved into one of the questions that I wanted to ask about the personal, real life, on the ground experience that you've witnessed pertaining to child marriages. I think that that's clearly highlighted that there are some thoughts that we hold high in terms of culture that have really played a role in ensuring that child marriages continue. I mean, I can speak for what we have in South Africa. There is a cultural practice in customary law called ukuthala. So that basically involves the girl's family selling off, quote and unquote, I use that term loosely, their child to somebody who wants to marry them. I remember there was a case where we read where a child was sent to go buy bread, and the family would tell the person who wants to marry her to say that at 9 o'clock we're going to send her to buy bread. That's where you could kidnap her, quote and unquote, and actually take her off to be your bride, and the dowry was then paid. So these are some of the shocking stories that we see, and this is not something that happened 30, 40 years ago. This is something that's happening, especially in remote areas. And yeah, just to get into the stats a bit more, because I think this helps us to see just how prevalent the issue is. I was looking at the stats on your website, so that we have a couple of African countries. I think it was about 8 of them in the top 10 countries with the highest prevalence of child marriages. Ranking at number 1 was Niger, which is ranked number 1 in child marriage, followed by Central African Republic and Chad. I mean, in Niger, prevalence is about 76%. Besides culture, what are some of those factors that in those countries that are ranking in the top 3 exasperates or ensures that child marriage continues? And how has your work on the ground as Girls Not Brides assisted in making sure, because I've also seen that some of these are actually member states that have enrolled to Girls Not Brides, and there's work that's been done there. So I wanted to maybe just get clarity around what are some of the issues besides culture and besides poverty, for example, that makes child marriages prevalent in these areas, and what are some of the implementations that you've done as an organization to ensure that on the ground we eradicate this issue?
Next level, definitely just speaking on your train of thought, you're quite right in which, for example, the prevalence rates, and for us, prevalence rates means the percentage of girls in a country that have ever been married or got married before the age of 18. And UNICEF and governments usually have this data, they collect this data, and we use this data as an organization to really drive our message. And as you said, a country like Niger, which leads in terms of the top prevalence rates in the world, which is 76%, it's really high. And to further underscore that, 16 out of the 20 countries with the highest prevalence rates of child marriage are in Africa. So you can see we really need to prioritize this issue. One of the key drivers, for example, in countries such as Niger, or countries that are really in the top 10 or top 20, is we know, as I said, child marriage and education are very closely linked. Educated girls are more likely to delay marriage than those who are less educated. So the countries with the highest rates of child marriage also have the highest rates of girls out of formal education. So you can see the direct link. Another key issue is also countries that have experienced conflict or humanitarian crisis, for example, climate change crisis, in which they're less likely to have systems, functional laws to enable girls and boys to achieve their full potential. For example, they're less likely to have schools or access to resources. We also see a rise in child marriage. And we've seen this also among communities that have been displaced, whether it's displaced out of their countries, refugees, or internally displaced people. We always see child marriage prevalence rates rising within those communities. So you can see it's really linked to a lot of issues. There's not one issue that we can say drives child marriage. It's really how all these issues interlink and work together to really increase the risk of child marriage or early marriage for most girls. And I'll say 2 factors are at play when we come to high rates of child marriage is looking at what causes girls to drop out of school, first of all, because again, linked to education, because being out of school makes girls more vulnerable to child marriage. And then what factors cause parents or families or communities to allow child marriage within their ranks for it to be a practice. And this again is linked to poverty, it's linked to the lack of economic resources, and sometimes also linked to lack of opportunities. They say, well, keeping a person in school or a child in school, whether it's a girl or boy, it's just going to end up using all my resources, but I don't see any returns. So it goes a lot into how can we then support these communities to see opportunities just beyond marriage. Marriage is not the only and all their children should be looking forward to. They need to have expanded horizons and really look forward to what they can do beyond getting married below the age of 18. And again, education is vital in ending child marriage. So really, how do we keep more girls in school, especially in these countries?
Thank you so much for that. I think now we can speak about the law. We touched a bit on it, but I don't think we really delved into the role of law and policy in safeguarding the rights of young girls who are forced into these marriages. So one of the aspects that I saw when I was going through your site was the legal age factor. So when you check the data across the regions, there's also a role that's played by the law in safeguarding the rights of young girls, in a sense that there are ages that are prescribed for marriage. So for example, there are countries that have enforced the age of 18 as the legal age of marriage. There are countries that have no minimum legal age of marriage, and there are no exceptions taken into account. So I wanted to know from you, how important is it for a country to have a minimum age for marriage, and how is this instrumental in protecting children from the abuse and harm and violence and exploitation, especially in the area of child marriage?
Laws are important instruments in setting, I would say, societal values, but also very important to hold governments to account for their commitments to human rights. So I began by saying our governments have signed commitments at the highest level, at the UN level, even at the regional level here in Africa, the African Union, and they've committed to end child marriage. All our governments in Africa, all our nation states here. So if we have a law at the national level, we as advocates, we as communities, as citizens can hold our government to account and say, look, we have a law setting the minimum age of child marriage as 18. So I would say having a minimum age of marriage of 18 without exceptions is an important part of a government's approach to ending child marriage and promoting gender equality. But I want to emphasize that laws alone will not work. So while they are an important entry point for holding governments to account or for us as advocates for our work on child marriage, they're just only one, a very important point, but only one of an element in a comprehensive approach towards ending child marriage. So I've talked about different drivers or different causes of child marriage. And the law on a minimum age of marriage, which is 18, is not alone to bring about the changes we want to see for girls and their communities and our society. And one answer is our governments have to take action, not only through law, but they also have to put in investment into ensuring the citizens have access to economic empowerment programs. They have access to opportunities beyond school, i.e. jobs. They have to operate in an environment where there is peace and stability, again linked to some of the risks of child marriage, and also to entrench a society where everyone, girls, boys, women, men, enjoy the same status, opportunities, and security. So for us at Girls Not Brides, our vision goes beyond zero child marriage. We want a world where girls and women, including those who have ever been married or currently married under the age of 18, can achieve their full potential in all aspects of their life. And in addition to passing laws, we always urge governments to create the conditions for girls and women in all their diversities to be socially, economically, and politically independent and free to make informed choices for themselves about whether they get married, about whether they have relationships, about what they do with their bodies and their futures. So I would finish by saying, in answer to you, Lebo, is law is important, but it's just one aspect. So we have to think about what other conditions do we need to create to ensure that all our citizens in our countries have equal access to opportunities?
100%. And I think that also speaks to the government's responsibility in ensuring that they also play a role in eradicating child marriages. I always say it's not the responsibility of grassroots organizations to deal with problems that the government should be responsible for, right? We are just aiding, being in the NGO space, we are just aiding to ensure that we assist people, but there should be policies and frameworks in place to ensure that whatever that's enacted is actually comes to. So it could go to things like signing of petitions, getting involved in educating people about the prevalence of child marriages, going into villages and remote areas to educate them about the dangers of this, ensuring that girls get access to education, which is something that I've seen Girls Not Brides really involve themselves and immerse themselves into, but we will speak about that just a bit later. I just want us to get into one of the quote-unquote trending topics that actually led us to be having this conversation today, which I think speaks to the work that's been done in the advocacy space, especially in a country like Sierra Leone. In the past weeks, we witnessed President Julius sign into law the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, which introduces a penalty of at least 15 years and a fine for any man who marries a girl under 18. And the law also prohibits cohabiting with a child and fines anyone who is arranging, aiding, or attending to such a marriage ceremony. And we've seen the First Lady, Fatima, being instrumental in advocacy around ensuring that that law comes into play. So I want to rather get your thoughts around such laws. What do you believe is going to happen? How is the landscape of girls' education and this law coming into play, what bearing will it have on Sierra Leone and the girls in that?
We're really excited. Yes, it's definitely a trending topic. And we always celebrate when countries seem to be taking their commitments seriously, such as Sierra Leone, and really addressing child marriage and, spending resources, passing legislation and laws to really entrench the fact that marriage under the age of 18 is not permissible. I would say, first of all, the passing of this legislation in Sierra Leone, and it has happened in other African countries and also globally over the past, I would say, 6-7 years, we've been seeing more and more legislation being passed, I think represents a great opportunity, not only for organizations such as ours that work on advocating an end to child marriage, but also for girls and communities that will be directly affected or impacted in a positive way if these laws are implemented well. In Sierra Leone, you talked about, yes, there are penalties for offenders. One of the key significant things about this new law is it protects girls' rights or survivors of child marriage or those who have ever been married. And it places a commitment on the government of Sierra Leone to ensure access to education for these girls, support services to support young girls who have been affected by child marriage or who are at risk or in communities that are at risk. So it really looks at the bill is quite comprehensive, and we always advocate for comprehensive legislation that not only serves to criminalize, because sometimes we have seen the problem of criminalizing actions that are so deeply rooted, it's not always effective, and sometimes then these actions may still be performed underground, where it is also harder to track and it's harder to support these girls. But evidence for us available shows that creating conditions that are essential for girls and young women to be socially, economically, and politically independent is a more effective way in implementing these laws. And for this, I mean is ending child marriage requires action at many levels. So the law is important. And in terms of implementation, how is the law empowering girls? How is the law mobilizing families and communities to create that supportive environment around girls and boys? And how is the law providing or placing a commitment on government to provide services? And we know services are very important to communities, and services could be very contextual. It depends on where you come from. It could be services such as health and, requiring the government to have health facilities available and accessible to communities. It could be education. It could be socio-economic programs, i.e. programs or interventions that really increase the economic stability of a community, a family. It could be access to out-of-school programs. So these services are very important. And if they're tied in and weaved into the law, then implementation will become more effective. And we will see, because of this more comprehensive approach, we're actually not only addressing the after effects of child marriage, i.e., we're not only punishing and criminalizing offenders, but we're addressing the root causes of child marriage in a community. What causes child marriage? And if the law is accessing that, we're going to start to see a great impact over a very short period of time. And our hope is that the government of Sierra Leone really commits funding and it commits resources towards a comprehensive approach towards implementing this new law. We have a lot of hope, and we continue to watch and wait and continue to support our members and partners in Sierra Leone.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, you've said a mouthful around what additional activities the government needs to really get into to address the challenge of child marriages beyond just enacting a law. I want you to maybe just talk about Girls Not Brides as an organization. I mean, people can easily go to the website and find your vision, which is allowing girls to have equal status with boys and ensuring that, as you said previously, there is zero child marriages across the globe. Can you maybe just talk about your organization, what it does? How can an ordinary citizen who is passionate about the issue of child marriage get involved to ensure that they actively play a role in eradicating child marriages? And beyond just the ordinary citizen, if somebody's listening today who is, for example, an NGO owner or a business who'd like to partner with you, what are some of the steps they need to take in partnering with your organization?
Absolutely. So Girls Not Brides, we are a global network or movement, a global movement of over 1,400 civil society organizations, and we are in over 100 countries. So our member organizations are from over 100 countries, all committed towards ending child marriage and ensuring that girls can reach their full potential. We launched in 2011, so we're slightly over 10 years old. We're at that sweet stage. We were initially launched by what is called the elders, and the elders consisted of prominent individuals working globally to address the most pressing issues of our time. This included the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Mama Grassa Marshall, the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson. They looked around and said, look, this was before 2011. Child marriage was not on the political agenda then. No one was talking about it, which seems strange because now you cannot enter a room without at least child marriage or the pressing issue of child marriage, being talked about. But then it was not on the political agenda, and yet it was happening in every single country. And because it's an expression of gender inequality, this means that because it was not being addressed, we had girls, young women, families, and communities really undergoing this practice with no support or no urgency to actually stop the practice. And so Girls Not Brides was birthed out of this desire to, look, let's address child marriage. Let's put it on the political agenda. Let's make governments stand up and make commitments towards addressing it because it's a key issue that's affecting our girls and young women in our communities. So following a decade, almost 10 years of persistent collective advocacy, so we do advocacy, we use our convening power to bring girls' voices closer to those who make decisions and those who can bring changes to the practice. We believe as Girls Not Brides in the power of collective action so that we bring together all stakeholders who believe in our vision on ending child marriage because it is possible. We amplify stories of change from across our vast global movement. It's a very diverse movement, over 100 countries, amazing member organizations that are doing fantastic work. We speak different languages, we work on different issues, but the one thing that binds us together is our vision that ending child marriage is possible in this generation. We as Girls Not Brides, we build partnerships at all levels. We support our member organizations to develop very clear and realistic strategies within their own context to advocate for change within their countries and within their communities. And we believe in developing and making available what works to end child marriage. So we call it the evidence to end child marriage. What works and what doesn't, we make this available. And all this evidence comes from our member organizations. So going back to our founding in 2011, one of the key visions was let's have governments commit towards ending child marriage. And I'm glad to say over the 10 years, we've started to see key commitments from the international level. So, for example, we influenced the decision to include the indicator or the commitment to end child marriage in what is called the Sustainable Development Goals, which was developed by the UN, which is signed on all members of the UN, United Nations, that have committed to end child marriage. We have coordinated and supported input from our members, from civil society and partners that we work with to support direct advocacy with governments. We talk to governments. We ask governments, what are you doing to end child marriage? We collaborate with regional bodies here in Africa. For example, we work very closely or collaborate with the Africa Union. We collaborate with the SADC within Southern Africa, because I'm talking to you now. We have a great collaboration with partners in Southern Africa with the SADC operation. We support our members to reach out not only to governments at the regional level, but in country. What are they doing to reach out to the different ministries? I'm glad to say in 2014, we saw the Africa Union actually take a lead in committing to ending child marriage. So they formed and developed what they call the Africa Union Campaign to End Child Marriage. And we've seen a number of African countries, over 28 right now, sign on to this commitment. This campaign really focuses on addressing the gender and power inequalities that address child marriage. And governments that sign on have committed towards changing their laws, but also changing their policies within country to actually address child marriage. So as a movement, we are stronger together than we are going alone. And I invite all of you listening, please join us. Go to our website and see how you can become a member of Girls Not Brides, or how you can support our movement. Our movement is ever growing. We started off in 2011 with 50 organizations. Now we're at over 1,400, and hopefully I come back here if Lebo invites me in about 2-3 years, and I'll be telling you how many more we have, and all our members working together. It's really that one voice. We're all speaking the same message. Let us address and end child marriage.
Thank you so much for that. I'd just like to close off by saying that we as African female voices and our audience are passionate about this, and thank you for allowing us to delve deeper into the issue of child marriage and the fantastic work that you're doing at Girls Not Brides. And we look forward to seeing more of your work, becoming allies and actually joining into the movement. And I believe that together we can really tackle the issue of child marriage and continue to amplify the voices of women who are stuck and who don't know how to get out of this issue, and countries who have allowed this to go on for longer than it should. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lebo. It was my absolute pleasure, my absolute honor to join you, and I look forward to following you. You have an amazing podcast, and please, to everyone, thank you so much for your passion in this, our vision, which is ending child marriage, and I believe together that we can.